Let's hit the high road. Let's hit the high road. It's the first touch, strong connection. It lays deep in your soul. Feel the kindness strongly coming, 'cause you can achieve your goal. Let's hit the high road. Let's hit the high road. Let's hit the high road.
Hi, it's Nancy Urell, and welcome to High Road to Humanity. So glad everybody's here today. And I have a lovely lady joining me from the UK today. Rosemary Roberts is here, and welcome, Rosemary, to the High Road.
Thank you, Nancy. It's lovely to be here.
Well, it's lovely to have you. You guys, we're going to talk about the children. You know, kids are near and dear to my heart. I'm sure y'all feel the same way. I'm a grandma, and anybody who has kids or has grandkids, this is going to be a really fun and informative show to watch. You know, Rosemary has taken time and put together a really cool book, What Matters for Family Well-Being. And this is for people who are having babies, young children, and their companions. Mental health and happiness is what she's going to be talking about with us today, and it's going to be a fun show. So make sure you share this one. Also, I want to say that my book, A Guide to Angel Communication and Spiritual Law, has been out now for a couple months, but I have a class, and Rosemary, I'm so excited. I put this class together last year, and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to put it out to the public because I want everyone to learn to connect with their guardian angel. So the first class, I uploaded it to YouTube yesterday. Just go to High Road to Humanity and you'll see the first class, the first angel class. And there are three. So each week I'm going to upload a new class. So the first class is connecting with spirit. The second class is connecting really, and you're learning about the angels, and you'll also connect with the earth. And the third class will be connecting with your guardian angels. So I'm super excited, and I hope you guys will check it out. Okay, so having said all of that, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Rosemary Roberts. She is an early years consultant and she's a writer. She holds a postgraduate diploma from the Tavistock Clinic in the UK in psychoanalytic, can't read this, psychoanalytic observation studies.
Psychoanalytic observational
Yeah,
studies.
so I got it. Psychoanalytic observational studies and a PhD companionable learning the development of resilient well-being from birth to three. You know, she's worked in nurseries, primary and higher education. She's worked as a volunteer. She's published two books, one on self-esteem, early learning in 2006, well-being from birth. She is a grandmother. Okay, she's a mom and
Yeah.
she's also a grandma. She's a Quaker, especially concerned for mental health and social justice. And it's true. And I'll say this before we get started. You know, it's really great that you put this together and that we're talking about the children. I feel like the children are, you know, at the hands of maybe sometimes bad situations, and we don't think enough or do enough for the children. Is that why you put this together? Tell me why you put this together. I just feel like we don't do enough for the kids.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I think almost every all parents that you talk to are absolutely doing their best for their children.
Yeah.
Um, it's more to do with, I think, about knowing what's going on for babies and very young children, and knowing what matters actually. I tell you why I wrote it, Nancy. It's because well, it's there's a very long story to it, but I will shorten it. You'll be glad to know. Um, I was before I had my own small children, and I was in the doctor's waiting room, right? And there was a waiting, and there was a poster on the wall with two teenagers, uh, taking up most of the poster with their backs to to everybody in the waiting room.
Mm.
And you saw them, you saw their backs, and you could see that both of them had their hands behind their backs, and both of them had their fingers crossed. And it said, there are 17 methods of contraception, and this is not one of them.
That's funny.
So, but I was working in a nursery school, local authority nursery school for 3 to 5s at that time. So I
Mhm.
hadn't quite got down to where I am now with babies and young children. But I sat there thinking, there are 1,001 ways of connecting with babies and young children, and this isn't one of them either. And we need to know more about it. So that was the start of it, really. Mm.
Yeah, and I think what I feel and what I was expressing when we first started is I feel like we've become so busy. We've become so into our phones and our computers and our work and the busy life that a lot of times, and this is how I felt. I was a single mom for a while, and I felt like my kids didn't get enough attention. Like I wanted to give them more attention, but we get so caught up with life that a
Mm.
lot of times we don't have the time. We have to kind of create the time. Have you found that? I mean, just the way of the world, I guess I'm saying.
I think it's very much the case for parents of babies and young children.
Yeah,
They're so spinning plates, and especially these days, well, certainly in the UK,
yeah.
you're having to work like crazy, and then there's the children, and then there's everything else. And I think it's very hard. I partly wrote this. Well, I wrote this book for companions of children, babies and young children. And by that I mean anybody who sees the baby or young child often, who knows them well, and where the relationship is loving or affectionate, right?
Mhm.
So obviously that's parents, but also grandparents, and actually grandparents aren't spinning plates quite the same way that you describe parents as
Right.
doing, you see. So I think there's a huge opportunity here for if grandparent, I mean, sometimes you don't have your grandchildren nearby, do you? And it's harder. But any grandparents who have the chance to make that close relationship, close companionable relationship with the baby or young child, it's just wonderful to be
Well,
able to
yeah,
do.
yeah.
And this book tells you how.
Yeah. I have a couple grandchildren. Well, I have 3 grandchildren, but
Yeah.
I can tell you this, my two of my grandchildren are now teenagers.
Yeah.
So it was so much fun, and I'm glad I spent time with them when they were little because now they don't want to hang out with grandma.
No.
So there comes a time, you guys, and I will say this also, having kids and working, I really appreciate you putting this together because I worked all the time, and then when I had a grandchild, I actually had the time, or maybe I didn't have the time, but I made the time. I had slowed down a little bit, and I think a lot of grandparents feel that way. And then you remember, and I think that's why we're all so delighted when the grandchildren come because times are a little different when the grandkids come. You're not as
Mm,
caught up. You know what I mean? And I think
yes.
it's wonderful when the grandparents can come in and
Yes.
yeah, that
There's
kind
there's a marvelous idea that it wasn't my idea. It's full of ideas that I've garnered from all over the place,
yeah,
as well as my research mainly. But
yeah.
there's a section about old friends, and this doesn't just apply to grandparents, actually.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it could be
It
answer.
applies to all those favorites that very small children have, the favorite book that they want again and again and again, or the favorite blanket, or the toy, or the place, or the person, or, lots of old favorites. Yeah.
Mm. You cover a lot in this book. One thing that really caught me was the cost of childcare. And
Right.
the reason I bring it up is I can remember dropping the kids off. It was dark. I worked for General Motors. dropping them off at like, I had to be to work at 8, so dropped them off at Latchkey. We call it Latchkey here, or we did. And then picking them up when it was late.
Yeah.
And not even that, but the cost. That's been, I don't know what it's like in the UK, but I will tell you, this has been something that's really been difficult for whether you're a single mom or not, two parents working. I just experienced in that
Sure.
respect. But I mean, the cost of childcare is crazy. What's it like over there in the UK?
Well, I'm fascinated to hear you say that, Nancy, because I didn't know what it was like in the US.
Oh, yeah.
Our system is, I think it's fair to say, really broken at the moment.
Mhm.
Um, there's more and more need for it. The government, every now and then, I mean, I wish we could invest in families and very small children instead
Right.
of investing in places where they can put their children and go and work to. You practically need to have a second mortgage to pay for childcare now
Right.
here. It
Right.
is fantastically expensive.
Right.
And as well as that, there aren't enough places. They're not the people who staff them are doing the most amazing, best they can job, but they haven't had enough. Most of them haven't had enough training or experience or
Right.
support, and they certainly aren't valued and paid enough. It's absurd.
Well, it
You
is
know,
because it takes two people to work nowadays. And I will say, when I
mm,
was single, I was in the real estate industry, but I had to make enough money in order
yeah,
to, and at one point I ended up moving across the country where my parents could help me. Because if you don't make a certain amount of money, how do you go to work?
you
Because your
can't.
whole
Well,
paycheck will go to the daycare. Now, I will suggest this, and I'm just going to throw this out there because I'll tell you what I did. This is years ago. I have grandkids now. But when my kids were little, I took them to a church daycare.
yeah.
It was the best thing I ever did. The people there were very caring. The prices weren't quite as high as some of these other places. So
Mm.
whoever's listening out there, that's something that was really beneficial to me as a mom and to my kids.
I think if you can find somewhere that feels right for your
Yeah,
child
yeah.
and that feels companionable with in the relationships that the staff make with the children and
Mhm.
that they know them, that's, and people need to just find the solutions that work for them.
Right.
But a huge reason why I wrote this book was because we do have this crisis in daycare.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me such a marvelous chance to talk about a solution to that, which is to do with the way that grandparents and other companions, because um, it's not just parents and grandparents that see the children, often know them well and love them. It can be extended family or neighbors
Right.
or all
Right.
sorts of, when you think, if
Yeah.
you can envisage a 1-year-old, let's say,
Yeah.
and just think about, for most 1-year-olds, not all obviously, but for quite a lot, how many of these children, how many this child, this 1-year-old, how many is their cast of companions? It's probably a surprising number. And there was something else that I wanted to say about daycare and why we did it like that. Oh, I know.
Mm.
So until about 30 years ago, maybe more, um, we always talked about the importance of the mother-baby relationship, that dyad, that dance between
Mhm.
the mother and the baby.
Right.
And it is, of course, absolutely critical. But
Mhm.
there wasn't any research and evidence about relationships that babies and young children make with other people, not just their mother. And what's so wonderful is that if a baby, much loved and much loving the mother, so that's really strong relationship they have. If they then go into daycare and fall in love with their carer, as quite often happens, that doesn't take away the love from the mother. It
Right.
kind of adds to it in an interesting way.
Mhm.
So we used to think, and I think lots of people still think that if the baby loves somebody else, it means that they love me less.
Yeah,
And
right.
it's not like that. It's
Right.
that the more they love, the more love there is. It's just the most wonderful thing when you see it working like that. So
Right.
it's a shame that people worry about it because they really don't need to.
They don't need to. And I'm really glad you brought this up because it's really about the love. It's all about the love. And I want to
Mm.
talk about this briefly. You know, when I was born, I'm going to age myself now, but many years ago, they told people not to hold the babies, to let them be by themselves and let them cry. Do you remember 50s and 60s? They said,
Yeah.
let the babies be alone and let them cry. And
Well, they're still
have to
saying
tell
it.
you, it was the worst thing that they could have ever told people to do.
Mm,
Because I know, and I've talked to people, and I know myself how it affected a whole generation. I just want to bring this up of
yeah.
children. You know this, don't you?
Well, I do, and I'm really concerned that there's still voices saying that that's
Oh,
what we
well,
should
yeah,
do,
of
you know?
course. Yeah.
And
Yes.
actually, so here's the thing.
Okay.
Babies, babies and very young children, actually babies right from when they're born, start learning. Sometimes people say to us, when do babies start learning? And they sort of mean when do they start knowing how to use language and beginning to read and write and stuff. But actually, babies are like little sponges, and there's plenty of research now to back this up, that they just soak up whatever happens to them. So, you know how children just always are growing? Well, small children are always growing.
Yes.
And that thing about, if only you could switch off their growing for a little while when they're about to need new shoes and you haven't got the money till next month. But no, they keep on growing and you can't turn the growing switch off. Here's the thing, you can't turn the learning switch off either.
Mm-hmm.
They're learning all the time. But of course, they're mopping up everything that happens to them, not just the good things that we think we want them to learn, but
All of
everything,
it.
all of it.
Yeah,
So,
the energy. I want to stop you for a second and just say, as you're speaking, I want to bring everybody back to the energy. The baby has felt the energy of the mother when it comes out of the womb, and the baby in a 1 year old, 2 year old, whatever, their energy, whatever energy they come in contact with, just like you were talking about the energy of the daycare, the babies feel that energy too. It's big. And so if they're in a place where they're comfortable and the energy's good, they'll be good. And if they pick up the negative energy, that stays with them as well.
yeah, yes, I think that's right. And
Mhm.
the but the other thing to be aware of, I think, and this is about energy too, in a way,
Mhm.
is that there seems to be this idea that babies, when you're a small child, everything's marvelous, and um, that myth about childhood, no stress, none of us as adults, we experience the most awful sort of things that make us stressful. We're anxious, we're exhausted, we're fearful and frustrated and insecure and overwhelmed and misunderstood. Many of us would say that when we're really stressed. But why do we think that babies aren't like that sometimes too? It's extraordinary because when you think about it, they are. So supposing they're suddenly being looked after by somebody they absolutely don't know. Um, However lovely this person is that they don't know, they're still it's anxious for the baby. And after a long day, they're exhausted and they may be a bit frightened and insecure and so on. And it's that response. The heart of the matter is how do we respond to them when they're like that? So if they're crying, babies are never being naughty when they're crying. It's their only way of telling us there's something the matter. And if we leave them alone to cry, because for some reason we think that's a good idea, um, they are learning that we will leave them alone and they are going to have to cope on their own. They learn that about us.
Mhm.
If we pick them up the minute we can and do our very best to comfort them, and all they need is to know that we're there and looking after them,
And they have
uh,
the love. Yeah.
then they learn to feel safe and secure. It's such a no-brainer, but yes. So that's what I wanted to be sure I said at some point.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say for all the moms out there who've had to leave their child with somebody that was a stranger, I had to at one point. I'll never forget it. My youngest daughter was 2 months old, and I had to go to work, and I didn't have anybody to watch her, and I had to find someone new. And it was the hardest thing I had ever did was to take her to somebody I didn't really know that well. And
Yeah,
I ended up, I didn't take her there for more than a few days. And I ended up, finding someone that was a family member that could, take her. Because she was so young. Because you feel as a mom, you even feel that. I have to say this. I mean, my daughter's in her 30s now, so she's grown up and she's fine. But when they're 2 months old, it's heart-wrenching because you do have to go to work. And there's a lot of moms and dads out there. I'm gonna throw their dads in there too, because it's both, who have to go to work and you do have to leave. And it's hard and it's difficult. And I love what you said. The best thing I can say is when you pick them up, just give them hugs and love them and, spend time with them. But it's hard leaving your kids at daycare. I want to move on a little bit. There's so much in this book, you guys. It's a little book, but there's a lot of cool information in here. Uh,
Nancy, can I say one more thing before you
yes,
move
of
on?
course.
And
Yeah.
that is that it's astonishing how resilient children are, though.
Oh,
And if
yeah.
you have had to do that and
I
you're
know.
now thinking, oh my Lord, I've wrecked
I
my
know.
child.
I ruined my
No,
kid
no,
for
no.
life.
They're, they'll be fine. So long as you're generally loving and affectionate,
Right.
that's what matters. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to flip to the other side of the coin because this is
Anna.
something else that I see quite a bit, and it just drives me nuts. And I'm sure a lot of people, the entitlement, the spoiled children, the tantrums, the bad behavior in public. Uh, you know, I can remember not taking my kids out for a while. Now, my older daughter was wonderful. I could take her to a restaurant. She would sit down. She would do whatever. My youngest daughter, I would take her. She would climb all over. She would do all kinds of things. And people are generally pretty decent when you take your kids out to eat. But it gets to a point where do you really want to deal with it? So you wait till they're older sometimes to take them out. But then you also see the ones where the kids are just running around the whole restaurant and the parents
Yeah.
don't even. So talk about this. You do address this in the book.
Yes, I do. I realized this was something that came out of my research and I hadn't seen it coming actually.
Ah,
Um, it came out of what I did see coming was how important a feeling of belonging is, right? And I think we're pretty familiar with that these days. Um, but what I didn't realize was the significance of belonging in terms of behavior. So this is what it's like. If you're if you're in any sort of a relationship, maybe with one other person, maybe you and your partner, or and that in that relationship you there's a sort of agreement about how to behave if you're going to be in the relationship. You might have discussed it or you might not, but there are some things that if you did those things, then that breaks the relationship. Or some things that you do need to do to keep the relationship. The same applies in whole families. There in families there are expectations about there may be expectations about how the children behave, or there may not. But
right.
and when certainly when you go to school or playgroup or
Yeah.
whatever you would call it, um, there are rules about how to
Right.
behave. And in our country, we've got a quite an epidemic about behavior, and whether that's a fallout from the COVID pandemic, I don't know, but um, that certainly didn't help. And now we've got a lot of children who are quite difficult to manage in a primary classroom. And more, they're being excluded from school.
What do
Um,
you mean excluded from school?
I mean, you can't, you know, you get three warnings and you're out kind of thing.
Oh, they're kicking kids out of school for not behaving.
Yes, but after a long time
Oh,
of
wow.
trying to work with them and so on. But in
Oh,
the
yeah.
end, for the sake of the whole class of children, if you've got a child who just wrecks the whole place every day, it can't go on. So you've got to do something.
A spoiled
And
kid, a lot of times it's a spoiled child who isn't made to behave at home, and so they don't want to conform and behave at school, is what I would imagine. Is that correct?
well, possibly, or maybe they've had such trauma that they don't know how to manage it.
Got it.
And that's not just about trauma at home. It can be all sorts of reasons why children, because I don't think children want to behave badly, really. I think
No.
that's
Correct.
them saying there's something the matter.
Right. That's their way
But
of acting
anyway,
out.
but
Yes.
the point about all this is that
Yeah.
it's like belonging and behavior are like two sides of the same coin. So if you want to belong in a relationship or in a classroom or whatever, then there are certain expectations about behavior,
Mm.
right? And a really helpful thing for parents to know is that um, if you mostly say yes to very small children, if when they want to do something, whether they've got the language to say, can we do X, or if they're only 6 months old, but they clearly want to drop food on the floor or whatever it is, um, or bash the other child because that's the only way they know of saying hello.
Mhm.
Um, you ask yourself, can I say yes? It's always it. For many people, the default these days is to say no to control the situation. But actually, the way through it is to ask yourself, can I say yes? So you're saying yes as often as you can, and you only ever say no when it really matters. And it
Mhm.
really matters when the child is not safe or somebody else isn't safe,
Right.
basically,
Right.
or, is going to be upset or unhappy or whatever.
Mhm.
But there are lots of times when we tend to say no because it might be inconvenient for us, or we might think it's going to be, or we want the child to feel that we're in control. But actually say yes as often as you can. But when you do say no, and there are only a few times, you've got to really mean it
And stick with it.
and stick with it.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's the
And
biggest
then,
thing.
and of course, if you bring up children aged 1, 2, 3, like that, and talking about this relationship between belonging in this family and how you behave, and you saying yes as often as you can, which is much more fun for everybody. Um, And there's plenty of ideas in the book about how to say yes without causing chaos. So,
Yeah.
normally you might not want to have them dropping food on the floor, but there are ways to do that which are not inconvenient. And then, or yeah, anyway, we can talk about that later maybe. But this whole thing about saying yes as often as you can and saying no when you mean it. If you've brought your 1, 2, 3-year-old children up like that, and
Mhm.
you always say no calmly and you explain why. Then, when they're teenage, they suddenly get rather like, well, there's a lot of common ground between toddlers and teenagers. I expect you may have noticed that
Yeah.
actually it's that awful frustration that toddlers have because they they want to be completely independent, me do it,
Mm,
no me.
mm,
But on the other hand, they are absolutely helplessly dependent on us.
right.
And it's so frustrating. Then it all goes quiet for a bit. But then in adolescence and when puberty comes along, they
Mhm.
suddenly have that same frustration.
That's
They
true.
want to be completely independent.
Yeah.
They are actually completely dependent. Now, if you've laid the ground for saying yes as often as you can, but say no when and mean it, if you have to, that's $1 million helpful for teenagers, for managing teenagers.
Wow. Great advice. Wonderful advice. No, absolutely. We don't have a ton more time, but I do want to talk about there was something that I read in your book as I was leafing through, and you say kids need their own time and space too.
Mm.
And that really hit me because, it's okay to let a kid play and do their own thing. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, yes. I mean, we whisk them from here to there all day sometimes, don't we? And
Mhm.
I think quite often there's a fear that the child will be bored and then they'll misbehave.
Oh,
So we want to keep them busy all the time.
okay.
The trouble is that children don't always want to concentrate on the things that we want them to concentrate on and we think they might like.
Mhm.
They're not, they don't always do that. There's this hilarious thing in our education system about asking when children have learned to concentrate. Well, the thing is, very small children are the best concentrators. If you think about a baby or a toddler, when it's something that they're interested in, like their favorite television program or playing in the bath
Yeah, they'll be glued,
or
huh?
stuff like that, they are glued, absolutely,
Yeah,
aren't they?
that's
And
true.
you drag them away and they're screaming from the
Or
playground.
even a baby, I'm thinking with the mobile,
Yeah, yes, yes. So
they're
they
fascinated.
know how to concentrate on things that they are interested in. What
Okay.
they're not so good at is concentrating on what they're not interested in. Now, I ask you, Nancy, I don't know you at all well, except for this conversation, but how good are you at concentrating on stuff that you couldn't care less about?
Yeah, not so
Can you
much.
do it? I mean,
Yeah.
why do we think that children can do stuff when we can't? It's just
That's
extraordinary.
interesting. Well, and
Yeah.
as you were talking about this, I was thinking, well, if we just left them alone for a little bit, they would discover
Oh,
things on their own
yes.
that,
Well, they might do if they're interested in those
yeah,
things, but
yeah,
certainly, I in my research, I quite often saw children who would take themselves off to the corner of the room and just gaze into the middle distance, or and that's wanting headspace to, because actually their brains are going far faster than ours in those first 3 years. And they're learning the most astonishing amount all the time. And we don't give them time enough to process those things. It's it's really tricky for them, I think.
yeah.
And so they do need a sort of gentle pace. And when they want to gaze into the middle distance, for goodness sake, let's let them.
Let them do it. Yeah, don't like. I really love this. This is great. This is great information. One thing I want to bring up, if you don't mind, and because I feel really strongly about it, is getting the kids outside.
Yeah.
I just feel like, and I see this with my grandkids now, it drives me nuts because I want them to go outside and they're playing video games and they all play video games and they all have phones and they all have tablets and and they do go outside, don't get me wrong, but I just really feel like the kids don't go outside and experience nature, fresh air, grounding. I'm really big on grounding to the earth energies, just, being in that energy of the trees and the water. Talk
Mm.
about this. What did you find out? Did you do any research on this?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And
Okay.
I think the key to it is, again, it's this companionable relationship
Okay.
that if you've got that sort of a relationship with the child, and they're used to having fun with you, um, then if you then take them outside, then you can have fun together looking at, if you've got one of those little bug bottles that you can put a leaf in or a tiny petal or something, and it's got a magnifying glass on the bottom. Have you seen those?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but just looking really carefully at things, it's no good taking a child out and saying, "Now you be fascinated with this while I listen to my phone or do scrolling through it or whatever."
Got it.
You've got to be at it together, you see. That's the key thing, I think. And
Mhm.
there was something else I was going to say about that, but I've forgotten what it
Well,
was now.
just the energy and just being outside and being with nature, I really feel like kids need that. They get stuck in the house and it gets, they need the fresh air. They need the connection
Mm.
with the earth energies. I'm more spiritual about that kind of thing. I think we've lost a lot of that because the kids are inside more than they're outside. That's all. I just think they need it. They need to play,
Yes, I
have
I
fun.
do agree.
Yeah, you run and stuff. What'd you learn from out of all of your research? What was the most surprising thing?
Oh my goodness. Oh, I tell you what was the most surprising
What?
thing.
What?
Um, well, um, there's a whole section of what children and young people and actually us adults too need for our well-being. And it was quite hard to know what to call it, but it's in the end, I was working with a whole lot of people who work with young children and with parents. And in the end, we all decided to give it the word agency. Now, in our country, agency sometimes refers to the public services, civil services, and so on,
Oh, okay.
and social services and so on.
Hmm.
But agency really means when you have got a sense of having some influence over your life. So within the sort of envelope of agency, there's how you learn, how you feel that you can make a difference to your life if you want to, and then the most surprising thing to me was, and those things, how you learn and making a difference, are absolutely fundamental to how we feel, so well-being, when you think about it, it really means feeling you're right in yourself
Hmm.
and feeling okay with other people
Hmm.
and reasonably coping.
Hmm.
That's sort of good enough well-being. And if you and you need to be able to learn new things if needed. So, got some you've got your grandchild for the day and you don't know quite what they're interested in, and you do need to find out. Somebody who thinks, I can find that out, I can think what to do, I can learn how to cook the food they like, or whatever it is. And other people think, I can't do this, I don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
And that sense of agency is really important. But here's the surprise. I I had this quite over 100 mothers, and I had this questionnaire for them, and then there were all sorts of analysis to be done with it, and so on, and also nine families that I went back and forth for years with, and we
Wow.
took films and just got to know each other incredibly well. The most important thing, it turns out from my research, and I just keep looking at this and thinking, yes, this is right. The most important thing is that for our well-being is a feeling that we are able and that we are caring for other people as well as ourselves. So we all know that for our own well-being, we need to look after ourselves. I mean, that's quite familiar, isn't it?
Hmm.
But what surprised me was the amount that our own sense of well-being is fed by the ways in which we can look after other people.
Connection.
Connection,
It's
yes.
all about connection. We're all
Yeah,
connected.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That is really cool. You guys, it's called What Matters for Family Well-Being. It's by Rosemary Roberts, Babies, Young Children, and Their Companions, Mental Health and Happiness. Thank you for coming on the show today. What great information you shared with us.
You're very welcome. It was lovely to talk to you, Nancy.
It was lovely to talk to you too. All right, guys, we're going to get out of here for today. Pick up this book. It's very, very good. Share it with your children and, anybody, if it's an aunt or an uncle or anybody. I think this is a really good book to give to people to kind of, if they're around little kids, it will help. It will really help. And remember to pick up my book, A Guide to Angel Communication and Spiritual Law. If you want to take the class, it is up online. I hope everybody has a fabulous week and take care. God bless.